Hello and welcome to Nature Source Care. This is Dr. Funda Goldman. In today's talk, I was going to cover the 6 tastes of Ayurvedic nutrition. So let's go ahead. And also, by the way, thank you so much for all your support for the channel, watching my videos, liking, sending nice comments. Some people send donations. Again, I really do appreciate all the support and feedback I get. So thank you for that. Note before we get started, actually, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. For any symptoms that persist or worsen, please consult with a qualified medical professional. And it's always best to determine the root cause of any disease and to develop a comprehensive treatment plan. So, even though I'm talking about tastes and their effects on the body and mind from an Ayurvedic perspective today, um, nutrition is always best. Comprehensive integrated nutrition is always best with other therapies, so keep that in mind. Also, if you want to learn more about nutrition, I have a whole playlist on nutrition, so you can see any of those videos. If you're specifically interested in learning more about Ayurvedic nutrition, I have quite a few videos on that. So I have Ayurvedic Pitta diet or the fire element diet, Ayurvedic Vata diet or the wind element diet, Ayurvedic kapha diet or the earth element diet. I also have Ayurvedic food combining for better digestion, Ayurvedic psychology nutrition, and spiritual nutrition, where I introduce the concepts of sattva, rajas, and tamas. So there's a lot that Ayurveda has to offer in terms of nutrition, and I would say that Ayurvedic nutrition is what I use most in my practice. I find it extremely helpful and it helps to relieve so many things that otherwise really haven't been touched by conventional therapies. So, other important nutrition videos that I have, somewhat surprisingly, I don't know, maybe because people feel like they already know or it's boring. I don't know. But I think actually some of those, two of the most important videos I've made, which I think are the least viewed on my channel, Uh, and I don't know why. The first one is how to do a salt inventory. So I did this video because I have so many people who come into my practice and they're on multiple medications for things like high blood pressure. That's usually the one thing they're, the main thing that they're dealing with. Or they might have stroke or cardiovascular disease or it runs in their family or whatever. And they're worried about their blood pressure, and they're on 2, 3 medications and it's still high. I usually find the problem is salt. And when I say that to my patients, they usually tell me, well, I already watch my salt. And they kind of blow me off, frankly. So I say, well, just if you would try the salt inventory thing, where they literally count the milligrams of salt they're taking in. And usually people are shocked by even if they're watching their salt, they're taking in much more salt than they think they are. And they're surprised at where salt is in their diet. Because, like, even the other day, I had a patient who, she drinks those little packets of hot chocolate or whatever and she's complaining of high blood pressure. And so we're looking, at the labels of her food, and I'm like, you have 150 milligrams of salt in your hot chocolate, and her eyes just went wild. She's like, "Are you kidding me?" I was like, "No, salt's everywhere if you're not paying attention." So I would really recommend that salt inventory video, and I think it's literally the least watched video on my channel, but it's there, so the information's out there. The other one that I think is really important and also not a very again, I don't know, maybe that I need to make like sexier titles for my videos or something. So maybe I'm not good at making titles for these videos. But the other big one is managing blood sugar. And I get into that, and that's for all types of blood sugar issues, whether it's diabetes, prediabetes, classic hypoglycemia, or reactive hypoglycemia. Um, and I actually made that not only to help with the physical things that people generally, associate with those sorts of diseases, but during the pandemic, I had so many people. It really felt like every third person who came to my office came in complaining about things like anxiety and insomnia. And when I gave them things for anxiety and insomnia, and it didn't really do much, then we started looking at physiological reasons of why they might be having anxiety and insomnia, and most of the time it came down to a blood sugar issue. So again, that all popped up during the pandemic because people were sitting at home too much and eating too much, comfort eating or whatever. And so their blood sugar was all over the place. So, I have a lot to say about managing blood sugar. That video's out there. So I'm just letting you know it's out there. Again, sometimes sort of, I'm surprised at which videos are popular and which videos are not. And those two I think are very important. So that's why I'm advocating them for your own sake. The other important nutrition video I have is choosing the first beverage of your day. And most people don't think about this in their lives, but I actually feel like the first thing you take in the day um, is really quite important. And I think that was my very first video on the channel. And again, there's a lot of good information there about different things that people do take in the morning and how they work or don't work for you, depending on, what you're trying to achieve. So anyway, lots of nutrition information out there for you that I don't think people come across every day that I think will be helpful. So there you go. All right, so today's topic, what's enough intro, right? Anyway, today's topic, Ayurveda and the five elements. Um, well, I just wanted to say a few things about Ayurveda and the five elements because this is background for talking about the six tastes of Ayurveda. So Ayurveda, if you're not familiar, it's also known as traditional Indian medicine. It's more than 5,000 years old. I think the most important thing about it, from a clinical perspective, is that it's an energetic paradigm of medicine. So what that means is in conventional or Western modern medicine, whatever you want to call it, that model is essentially a biochemical model and or a biophysical model. So when you're thinking about the body from a Western modern conventional perspective, again, whatever you want to call it, you see, it's like physics and chemistry and, and biology. So it's like, neurotransmitters and, if you push here or decrease, increase something here, or you can decrease something there. It's this whole sort of like very mechanical way of looking at the body, which is helpful. It's actually useful. But this whole energetic paradigm of medicine with Ayurveda, I found extremely helpful and can really help things that I think aren't well served by conventional Western medicine. So that's why I use it so much in my practice. But from that perspective, oh, and then the other thing about an energetic paradigm in medicine, I wanted to say, if you're not familiar with energetic paradigms of medicine, such as homeopathy or Ayurveda, is that it's really what you have to wrap your mind around is that you have to kind of start seeing patients, symptoms, treatments, medicines, all these things, clinical things, as energies instead of chemistry issue or a physical issue. It's more of an energetic issue. All right, so the five elements, which are in Ayurveda, are ether or space, air, fire, water, and earth. So those are fairly, I think, intuitive, easy to understand. So these five elements comprise all things in Ayurveda. So let's go from the five elements to I think it's the six tastes on the next slide. Yes, the six tastes. So again, I mentioned before we have ether, air, fire, water, earth. So we have six tastes. So this is how they match up. So the six tastes are sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, astringent. So the sweet taste is made up of earth energy and water energy. The sour taste is made up of earth energy and fire energy. The salty taste is made up of water and fire. The pungent taste is made up of fire and air. The bitter taste is made up of air and ether, and the astringent taste is made up of earth and air. So let's look at a couple here. We've got three, so there are three tastes here: sour, salty, and pungent. And they're either fire, so sour is fire and earth, salty is fire and water, and pungent is fire and air. So all three of these, and these are the only three of the six that have an earth, or excuse me, a fire element as part of them. So fire is heating by nature. So because there's this heating, intense element of fire in these three tastes are heating by nature. they will heat up the body and they will help or harm, depending on how much of these tastes you take into your diet, with a heating capacity. So, when there's not enough heat in the body, things will become cold and stagnant. When there's too much heat in the body, things become irritated, dry, and inflamed. So, at the base of these six tastes, you have these five elements. So, it's important to denote that. All right, so let's go on. The other thing is that if you're familiar with Ayurveda, there are what are called the three doshas, which are essentially three kind of imbalances. Okay. The first one is vata, the second one is pitta, and the third one is kapha. So vata, I loosely translate as air. Okay. And the reason why is that it's made up again. So now the three doshas are made up of um, also the five elements. And because vata is made up of elements and tastes are made up of elements, you can actually change the balance of vata, pitta, and kapha through your tastes. Because again, they're both made of elements, but different combinations of them. Okay. So vata, I loosely translate as air because it's easy for people, I think, to understand and grasp, when we're quickly talking about it in the office. Vata is made up of air and space element. Okay. So if vata is air and space element, it will be increased by the tastes that have air as one of their elements. So of the six elements, the three that have air, right? Because every taste has two different elements to it, pungent, bitter, and astringent, all have air. And so those three tastes, flavors, um, will increase vata if taken in excess. So likewise, pitta, which I loosely translate as fire, but technically pitta is made up of fire and water, those elements, those two elements. So pitta, which is fiery by nature, is a kind of usually a fire condition, so inflammation typically and anger in the mind, or irritation in the mind. Pitta is increased with tastes that have fire as one of their elements. So I just talked about that in the last slide. So sour, salty, and pungent, those three tastes have fire as one of the two elements that comprise those tastes. So if you want to increase pitta, if you want to increase fire, like if somebody's cold, if somebody's too vata or too kapha, you would increase sour, salty, pungent tastes. Okay, so just to round out here, so kapha, I always loosely translate as earth to make it simple for people to, understand. Because if I start saying all this in the office, people are like, wait, what? Fire, water? They're like, that's too much. So kapha, I usually say is the earth element. But technically, kapha is made up of earth and water elements. Okay. And kapha is increased by tastes that have either earth or water as their major component. So sweet, sour, and salty tastes. And in the previous slide, I think I listed them. Like the first element I listed was the primary component, and the second one was a secondary component. I don't think I mentioned that before. All right, so the idea here is, again, we're still talking about elements, but now we're talking about elements that make up the doshas and how you can balance them by the elements that comprise the tastes. So this is how you can shift vata, pitta, kapha through taste. Okay, relationship. All right, so now this is basically a schematic to bring the last few slides together. So we have the five elements at the top, we have the six tastes in the middle, and then we have the three doshas on the bottom here. Okay, so again, the five elements: earth, water, fire, air, space at the top. Then you can see, like, if earth is green and water is blue, sweet taste here is earth and water. Okay, so if water is blue and fire is red, if you bring water and fire together, you get the salty taste. Got it? So you can see how the different elements come together to make the taste. And then if you go to follow the arrows from the taste, right, from sweet, you got this arrow going down to kapha. So sweet taste will build kapha. It will build earth energy in somebody. Okay. And again, I have a whole video on nutrition and kapha, if specifically you're interested in kapha. But again, I'm just getting into more of the basic foundational information about how each of these things relates to each other in Ayurveda. Okay. Then we talked about salty. So look at the arrows of salty here. Now there are two arrows coming from salty. So if the salty taste is made from blue and red, water and fire, salt, one arrow goes down to kapha because salty has water in it, right? Kapha dosha is increased with water and earth. Yeah, and because the main component of salt is water, too much salt will increase kapha, which makes sense, right? Because when you get salt and when you eat too much food, you retain water. And too much water, congestion, swelling is a kapha type of symptom. Okay, now there's another arrow going from salty, and the arrow from salty goes down to pitta. So pitta is the fire element. So this is people who have inflammation. Now, why does this make sense? Because again, blue water, red fire, you put those together, you get the salty taste. And too much salt also increases pitta. So too much salt increases kapha, it also increases pitta. Why is that? Because of the fire element. And people don't tend to think about that. Most people think, most people have some idea, oh, if you eat too much salt, you kind of swell up. But most people don't also think that like the salt also has a fire element. So like when you drive your car around on wintry streets here in Connecticut, they often put salt on the roads to break up ice and snow. So because salt is corrosive, and that's because of the fire element. That's also what, rust, if you have an old car, like a metal car, most cars, I think are, some sort of plastic alloy or something like that. But salt also rusts metal. So salt is actually corrosive. And the thing is, if you eat a lot of salty food, it will corrode your, your tissues in your body, especially the soft, delicate tissues like the mucous membranes and things like that, or, the mucous membranes of the stomach. Okay, so again, 5 elements, 6 tastes, 3 doshas, and this is how they all kind of stack up and feed into each other. So then we can talk about the 6 tastes and their energetic effects, because again, I mentioned this whole Ayurvedic paradigm is energetic. So these energetic effects, and here they've got two. So there's warming and there's cooling. Okay. And these warming or cooling effects, they call virya in Ayurveda. So if you ever hear virya, this is what they're talking about. So again, we have the 6 tastes on top: sweet, salty, sour, pungent, bitter, astringent. And I already mentioned salty, sour, and pungent. I have a little, what is that, arc and pointing to warming. Okay. Salty, sour. The reason why these 3 tastes of the 6 are warming is because these 3 have fire as one of their elements. The other 3 tastes, sweet, bitter, astringent, all point to cooling. So sweet, bitter, astringent are all cooling in nature. Okay. So, and you can think of it as like, if somebody's too cold, you want to give them warming foods energetically, not just like hot, like cooked. That's important too, but energetically warming foods. If somebody's too hot, you want to give them cool foods. So, but what does this warming and cooling thing mean and do? What does that represent in the body? So, warming foods, warming herbs will increase pitta, so that dosha. It will increase agni. Agni is a digestive fire. So if somebody's having trouble digesting their food, they want warming food. Not just, again, warm cooked, that's important, but they want warm, energetic food. Warming things also increase circulation. So that's why like a lot of herbs are used for cardiovascular disease, like ginger, garlic, turmeric, cinnamon, because those are all warm herbs, some warmer than others, but because they're all on the warm side of the spectrum of warm to cool, they will increase circulation to some extent or another. Okay. And again, if you take too much warming food, and again, energetically warming, it can cause an excess of things like burning, hypoglycemia, inflammation, and bleeding. Because it will, all that fire, again, you may not see it as fire, the salty chips or the sour, whatever, yogurt or, things, I mean, hot, spicy food, you know, if you have too much of this in your diet, and some people do, it will start to break down tissues the way it breaks down cars when salt is on the road in winter and will cause inflammation and even bleeding that gets really severe. Yeah. So on the cooling side, what does that mean? Cooling food, herbs will increase vata and kapha, so wind and earth. They promote tissue growth because cooling is like settling. Yeah. It relieves inflammation, but in excess, too much cooling, energetically cooling food will suppress Agni or digestion. It will slow down metabolism. It will lead to ama. Ama is toxicity because you're not circulating. You're not your system's slowing down, so you're not eliminating toxins. You're not moving fluids. It can increase, facilitate poor digestion, and also facilitate weight gain because again, things aren't moving and flowing and things aren't active. It's cooling things down. All right. So the six tastes and their energetic effects are virya. Now we have the six tastes and their tissue effects. So the tissue effects are vipaka. Okay. So again, we have on top here the six tastes: sweet, salty, sour, pungent, bitter, astringent. Okay. Now there are three different tissue effects. Okay. And they have the same name, so try not to get confused. But so there's the six tastes, and there are the three tissue effects, and the three tissue effects are called sweet, sour, and pungent. So they have exactly the same name. So just try not to get confused. All right. So let me just say first, sweet and salty, these two tastes have a sweet effect on the tissues. What does that mean? If a food or herb, tea has a sweet effect, it means that it's going to increase feces and urine production. So if you've ever noticed, maybe you haven't, like if you eat a lot of sweets, like if you have a big thing of ice cream or cake or bread, not all bread though, bread sometimes can be dry, but yeah, something sweet like ice cream or cake or something like that. It will actually cause you to go to the bathroom faster because again, the sweet tissue effect increases feces and urine. So it's going to push fluids through the body. Okay, then we have sour taste, and sour taste produces a sour tissue effect. What does that mean? So a sour tissue effect increases feces and urine like the sweet effect. It also increases sweat because the sour taste has both fire element as well as earth element. So sour taste is grounding but also heating at the same time. So sour tissue effect increases feces, urine, and sweat. So fluids are not only coming like through the bottom half of the body, but you're actually losing fluids and things like that through the skin. Now the last three tastes are pungent, bitter, and astringent. You see they're all together. They point to the pungent tissue effect. The pungent tissue effect means that pungent, bitter, astringent herbs and food will increase sweat production. Which, if you eat spicy food and people start dripping sweat, that's an obvious one. But in a less obvious way, if you have a lot of pungent, bitter, astringent food, you will sweat more, even if you don't notice it, and it will dry up the body. Yeah. So, what are the results of sweet, sour, and pungent tissue effects? Well, sweet tissue effect increases tissue growth. So if you eat a lot of sweet, salty food, that's actually an anabolic type of food or herbs. They're going to build tissues. The sour tissue effect is going to increase metabolism because we see it's like fluids moving out of the body in different directions. It's going to be stimulating. Too much pungent, bitter, and astringent taste, which creates a pungent tissue effect, is actually going to break down tissues over time. So that's why, for example, when a lot of times when people do cleanses and things like that, they avoid sweet and salty food and they start eating a lot of vegetables. Yeah. Because the vegetables, most vegetables are pungent, bitter, and astringent rather than sweet and salty. And so there's this clearing effect that happens. But if you only eat vegetables, it will dry out your tissues and the tissues will break down because there's not enough building to balance. So this is all about building. I mean, all about balance in the end. But some of these things build and some of these things break down and clear and cleanse. So it's about balance. Okay, so that's that. Okay, so still more Ayurveda in the six tastes here. I mean, this is why, I mean, maybe already you're seeing like why Ayurveda I think is one so fascinating, but how deep, how deep the knowledge is about food. I mean, and what it does in the body. And now we're going to talk about the mind. So, again, six tastes, six, sweet, salty, sour, pungent, bitter, astringent. So, how do these affect the mind? So, the sweet taste, when you eat something sweet, it creates this feeling of joy and feeling loved and supported. Yeah, that's part of why probably most people have, something sweet like cake or ice cream or cookies or whatever for celebratory events. It's kind of a natural, like, let's just, amp up the happiness here. The thing is, when there's too much sweet taste in the diet, what will happen because sweet tastes heavy and gluey, um, it can create feelings of greed and attachment. Yeah. So the salty taste, when you have enough salt in your diet, a balanced amount of salt in your diet, you will feel enthusiastic, you will feel lively, you will feel energetic. If you eat a no salt diet, like no salt anywhere, you can feel unmotivated and irritable. Because again, the salty taste is made up of water, which is emotion, you can think about it that way, and fire and passion. So if there's no passion and no emotion in your life, you're just mentally going to feel pretty dried out. Yeah. Yeah, interesting, huh? Yeah, I thought this was fascinating. So anyway, sour taste. When you get enough sour food in your diet, it can actually improve mental clarity, right? Because the sour taste is made up of earth and fire. So earth is going to be grounding. So there's going to be organized thinking and fire. So there's going to be, perceptive thinking. So you're going to have a lot of clarity and focus. But if there's too much sour, you can become hypercritical because there's too much fire, there's too much processing, over processing. There's a lack of balance there. Yeah. Then we have pungent taste. So when you get enough balanced, pungent taste in your diet, you will be passionate. But if you don't get enough, you will feel dull, dispassionate. If you get way too much pungent taste, really, really spicy food all the time, you can become angry, irritable because of all that fire. That's the main element of pungent taste is fire. It's fire and water, but mostly fire. Then the bitter taste is actually, that's why some spiritual people try to increase their intake of bitter food and herbs and things like that because the bitter taste helps to um, release attachment to things. So attachment to like material, striving for money all the time or trying to some sort of super duper ambition at work beyond what's truly needed. Something that's a little bit more ego based or even like sensual sensations, sexual passions, that sort of thing. Because they want to use that energy instead of driving things in the material world, driving forward in that way. They want to use that energy to lift up into a more enlightened state. Yeah. So the bitter herbs and food can help with that. But if you take too much bitter, right? If somebody's always like drinking black coffee, for example, you can become apathetic because they're so detached, you kind of don't care anymore. And this can be towards, the same sorts of things like work or relationships, but also, other people's emotions very distant, too distant. Yeah. And then the last taste here is astringent. So astringent is kind of drying and organizing as a taste. Like it has that like pomegranate is astringent. So when you drink pomegranate juice or eat some pomegranate seeds, it kind of makes that little pucker. And it's not sour exactly. It's like there's this sort of dry puckering that happens, or like quince. Quince also really is like that. It's very astringent. And the same sort of thing happens in the mind. So when you have enough well-balanced astringent taste in your diet, your mind will be organized. If you have too much astringent food in your diet, you can become rigid. If you don't have enough astringent taste in your diet, you can become scattered. So the six tastes and their various mental effects, we have that as well coming from Ayurveda. All right. So the last couple of slides here, these are kind of more systemic effects for the six tastes, and some of these overlap with, I think, some basic notions of Western or modern conventional nutrition. Um, and so, again, to kind of end this talk on more of a higher level, because we were going deeper, and subtle, and now it's just like, let's pull back and get a higher view of all this. So the first three tastes, sweet, sour, and salty. So sweet enhances ojas. Ojas is from an Ayurvedic perspective. It's a concept from there, that paradigm. Ojas is this, it's thought of as this nutritive fluid that sort of bathes and protects the tissues and the mind and that sort of thing. And so when we have a good amount of ojas, it means we also have good immunity and we have this sort of glow about us. When we work too much or don't support ourselves enough through good nutrition, or stressed out, that sort of thing, and people get dull and sort of gray and inward and all that kind of thing. It can mean that part of what happened through all that overdrive of physical or mental or emotional activity is that they kind of burned up their ojas. So the sweet taste enhances ojas. Sweet taste, we sort of mentioned before, is anabolic, so which is good if you're trying to gain weight. Sweet taste is can be helpful. Again, in a balanced diet, but too much sweet taste can cause weight gain. It can also help with energy. That's why athletes, take in sweet sweet tasting things like fruit and other sort of sweets while they're working out to keep their energy up. But it can cause issues with blood sugar, whether it's diabetes, prediabetes, hypoglycemia, or what have you. The sweet taste also can not cause cold, but kind of bring it on because it makes the body sticky. So things like bacteria and parasites love the sugar too, and so it makes you, when you eat too many sweets, it makes you a good host for those things. But it can cause a cough. So if you've ever noticed, especially sweet tasting things like I tend to notice it more after I do dairy, so like ice cream or yogurt. I'll have some, and then like usually within a few minutes I cough a little bit, and I don't typically cough. So it's good. So again, I just, again, once you start to know, I learn about Ayurveda, and then you start to see these things, you're like, oh yeah, I never really noticed, and now I do. The sweet taste can also increase congestion because, again, it's sticky and heavy. So it makes fluid sticky and heavy, including the blood as well for blood sugar issues. Heaviness of body, heaviness of mind. That's just naturally what it does because the sweet taste is heavy by nature. That's why it increases kapha. It can make you feel lethargic. It can reduce blood flow because, again, it makes the blood thick, heavy, sticky, so it can't clear through those tiny little capillaries for a good blood exchange. And so that's why people who eat too much sweets and, like, especially diabetics, they start to have problems with their circulation and wound healing and stuff like that. I mentioned infections because sweet taste, other critters, small microscopic critters like as well, bacteria, parasites, typically fungi, love sweet taste. It can also cause addiction. Um, the sour taste stimulates senses and appetite. So it is stimulating by nature. It increases salivation and digestive enzymes. That's why sometimes people put a little bit of lime or lemon in their water before they eat, or they'll eat a salad first where there's typically something sour like a lemon on the salad or a vinegar, because it actually is a way of ramping up the digestion for heavier foods that are coming after the salad. It's also antispasmodic because it's warming. One of the elements of it is fire. It's refreshing, energizing. If you take a little spritz of lemon or lime in your water, it kind of, if you're paying attention, it kind of jolts you up physically and mentally. The thing that was, it can be drying to the membranes because there's that fire element, and fire, too much heat will dry things out. Um, Sour is also kind of funny for congestion. A little bit of sour can break up congestion, and too much sour can actually cause congestion. So, having the right balance of sour if there's congestion involved is important. And again, because sour is slightly heating, it can be irritating and it's acidic typically, because a sour taste is usually a sign on the tongue that there's acid in the food or herb or whatever. So if you eat something sour, it's acidic, and anything acidic is going to be corrosive by nature, especially when there's a lot of that, when it's really sour, or when you have a lot of that type of food. And because it's acidic, and besides being irritating, can cause inflammation. So the salty taste is a mild laxative. It's an antispasmodic as well, like sour taste. It is anabolic. It is building by nature, especially fluids like water retention. It is also energizing, like sour taste. It does stimulate digestion, also like sour taste. Obviously, it influences fluids, so there's fluid retention, and there can be congestion. So fluids you might get swelling and backup of fluids of both like the cardiovascular fluid as well as lymphatic fluid. And because of that, you can get increases in blood pressure. If you don't get enough salt in your diet, you might have low blood pressure, swelling we mentioned. And also salt is also fiery. One of the elements of salts besides water is fire. And so because of that fiery nature, you can also get inflammation and dryness from too much salty food. And then the last three tastes here: pungent, bitter, and astringent. So pungent because it's the most fiery of the six tastes. Increases agni, which is digestive fire, so it can help digestion. It Because of that fire, it moves things, so circulation can be helped. It's a decongestion because that fire kind of melts the congestion, if you will. A lot of pungent foods, like a lot of spicy herbs, are antibiotic because they're so hot that they will destroy small critters. Because of this heating, really intense heating quality, though, Ayurveda at least recognizes that there can be problems for fertility because the very delicate tissues of like eggs and sperm and that sort of thing can get dried or burned out from too much pungent food. And again, because it's so fiery, burning in general, especially of the GI and the mucous membranes, those are pretty sensitive, will be irritated. So stomach, colon, nose, lungs, they'll all get burned out, dried out. Um, the pungent food also typically causes thirst, and too much of it can cause fatigue because, again, when there's too much burning like that, the body it weakens the body, and then the body has to kind of fight it, try to cool the body down, and again, dryness and inflammation. The bitter taste is cleansing because it's light and moving because it's very airy. It's antitoxic, so that's why, again, when people do cleanses and stuff, they tend to do a lot of bitter herbs or bitter foods, like things like vegetables and more plant-based stuff rather than heavy meats and cheeses and dairy and stuff like that, because those are building, but they also can create too much congestion. So the bitter taste can also be a bit of an antibiotic in a different way than pungent. Pungent is fire, so it's going to like burn things. Bitter is airy, so it's going to dry things. And so they're drying by nature. It can also decrease libido because we talked about like pungent and stuff like that. Pungent is fiery, and so again, a little bit of fire can help with passion, but when you go the other way with bitter, because it's cold and dry, that's going to affect that cold, dry energy is going to affect the libido when there's too much bitter. But because it's cold and dry, it can help with things like itching and burning and fever because those things are more hot, inflamed, and sometimes fluids are involved. Like there's fluid accumulation because of that. Um, what the fluid's there to basically try to cool the fire. That's the body's response to too much heat. Um, because it's cold and dry, the bitter taste, it can firm tissues. It can help with digestion, especially the bitter taste. But again, too much bitter can be depleting for the body. Like if you're constantly cleansing, if you're only eating plants, only vegetables, like you're going to wither away. The astringent taste, it's binding and drying because again, the elements there are air and earth. So grounding, organizing, but drying as well. So the astringent taste is drying. It's also anti-inflammatory because they're generally cooling. They can be decongestions because they're dry. They'll balance all that stuffiness. Astringent herbs and foods can stop bleeding. So cinnamon, for example, like this picture, cinnamon is was used by midwives back in the day to help stop bleeding after childbirth. Like literally, midwives would, put a bunch of powdered cinnamon on the wounds and stuff like that. And there's a styptic effect, or what they call a anti-bleeding effect of cinnamon. So yeah, if you didn't know, astringent taste also has can cause actually spasms because it's so cold and drying, and cold and drying energy is usually a sign of too much vata or too much wind. And so when people have spasms and they're shaking like the wind, you can think of it that way. It could be that there's too much astringent taste in their diet. And also constipation. Again, that's a condition where there's too much dryness in the colon. The colon's too cold and dry, and so feces isn't moving through properly. And also problems with libido. So again, if you're cold and dry, mentally, physically, emotionally, you're not going to be up for some action, with your honey. So, so yeah. So again, these last two slides were kind of a little bit more of the overview, kind of integrated look at these tastes and what they do mentally, physically, emotionally. So there you have it, the six tastes of Ayurveda. Pretty fascinating, I think. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful and useful as always. And yeah, I always appreciate your support and listening. Also, I think most of you know, I have these other things available. Actually, most of the information I presented here was in one of the books I wrote. My book is available on Amazon. I wrote it a few years ago. I think it's still out there. It's called Drink to Your Health: Medicinal Teas, Juices, and Milks from Around the World. And that title, again, I may not be good at coming up with titles, but that title probably doesn't tell you at all, give you any clue that I actually go into depth into Ayurveda. And actually, most of that book is I talk about these concepts because I do an introduction to Ayurveda chapter in that book because I use so much Ayurveda in the book. But it's basically a book on herbs, teas, fruits, and vegetables, like right from your grocery store, and their medicinal properties, as well as these different energetic qualities from Ayurveda. It's an integrated point of view of Western and Ayurvedic and naturopathic point of view for these different things that are in the pharmacy. And again, from a naturopathic doctor's point of view, I always see the grocery store as a pharmacy because I know enough about fruits and herbs and vegetables to know which ones to eat when I'm feeling this way or that way, or when other people are doing that. And so, if you're looking for sort of an index for fruits, vegetables, herbs, teas, and their medicinal purpose, their medicinal effects, and all these Ayurvedic effects, then that's why I wrote that book because I didn't feel like that information was out there in that kind of way. So that's out there on Amazon. Also, I think most of you know, most of my photos in my talks, my videos are actually photos I've taken because I'm also a professional photographer, and so I have an online photo gallery. So if you're interested in any photos, there are different sorts of gifts besides prints and things like that available there with my photography. And I have another YouTube channel. So this is my vata, vata showing itself very prominently. But my other YouTube channel is on Vedic astrology, so ancient Indian astrology and other Vedic art. If you're interested in Ayurveda, you might be interested in that. So different offerings depending on what you're up for, interested in, or what you need. So as always, thank you again for your time, and I wish you all the best. Take care. Until the next one. Namaste.